I think it's safe to say that change is on my agenda. Change for good. And I embrace that and I enjoy that change. I don't fear it.
Beneath the grand beauty of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal history rest in heavy silence, something unexpected was uncovered, something never meant to surface, something powerful enough to shake the royal family to its core. What began as a quiet, routine restoration project quickly spiraled into a heartbreaking discovery. Hidden deep beneath ancient stone floors lay secrets buried on purpose, secrets protected by time. When young Prince George was told the truth about what had been found, tears filled his eyes. This wasn't just old history pulled from the ground. It was something far more personal and painful. It was a mystery wrapped in silence, the kind that leaves scars, a discovery so heavy it could push a young prince to tears. And that's why people are asking questions. What was the door beneath the castle, and why had it been hidden for so long? Deep below Windsor Castle, a team of workers moved carefully through tunnels that had remained untouched since the war, sealed off and forgotten by almost everyone except the castle itself. Thomas wiped sweat from his forehead as the underground air pressed in, thick, damp and uncomfortable. His lamp flickered once, then twice. He stopped walking and raised his hand. The other workers froze. Thomas stood perfectly still, feeling something strange brush against his face, a cool draft of air moving where no air should move at all. He pressed his palm against the wall. The stones felt wrong, newer than the rest. His fingers traced crumbling mortar that broke apart like dry bread. Thomas called out to his team, his voice tight. They gathered quickly. One by one, they removed stones. With every stone, the darkness behind the wall grew deeper and more unsettling. After an hour of careful work, they stepped back and stared. A door stood before them. Not just any door, but something ancient. The wood was blackened with age, carved with detailed markings that caught the lamplight. A royal crest stood clear and undeniable. Some symbols were familiar from history books, but others twisted between them in ways no one could explain. There were strange patterns. Circles inside circles, curved lines like waves, markings belonging to no known language. None of them recognized the meaning. Thomas didn't hesitate. He knew they had to report this immediately. Nobody argued. Within hours, palace officials arrived, faces serious, clipboards in hand. Photos were taken, measurements recorded, every detail logged. They spoke in whispers that echoed through the tunnel. Soon, the news reached King Charles. Sitting in his study, he read the report once, then again. An unknown door beneath his own castle, hidden for who knows how long. The implications made his stomach tighten. He ordered the area secured and insisted no one outside the palace learn about the discovery. The officials nodded and left without delay. The king stood by his window, staring out across the castle grounds. Secrets had a way of resurfacing, especially old ones buried with intention. Whatever lay behind that door had been hidden deliberately. Someone long ago had sealed it away beneath stone and time. But why? He needed answers. He needed to see it himself. And so, the boy who was never meant to be king descended the stone steps, with Prince William beside him. Neither man spoke. The air felt wrong, too cold, too still, for a place that should have held nothing but silent stone. A historian waited near the ancient door, her face tight with worry. She had spent 2 days poring over every blueprint, every document, every record of Windsor Castle in the royal archives. She explained the tunnel did not appear in any official plans. Someone had built it in complete secrecy, hidden from records, hidden from history. The king and prince exchanged glances. A secret room beneath the castle meant secrets worth hiding. Family secrets meant to stay buried forever. William stepped closer to the doorway. The darkness beyond swallowed the light from their lamps. History pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. Centuries of silence stood on the edge of breaking. The king nodded. Together, they stepped inside. The chamber opened like a tomb. Dust floated thick in the lamplight. The air tasted old, untouched for decades, maybe centuries. Their footsteps disturbed layers of silence that had settled like snow. Furniture filled the space. Tables and chairs carved from dark wood, dulled by time. Sealed boxes lined the walls, stacked carefully as if someone intended to return. Everything looked frozen, abandoned mid-task. But the paintings drew their attention first. Dozens leaned against the walls, covered in grey, fragile cloth. William reached for the nearest one. The fabric fell away like spiderwebs. A young boy stared back. 8 or 9 years old, dressed in royal clothing, rich fabric, gold trim marking nobility. His eyes were proud yet sad. No one recognized him. The historian stepped closer, confusion growing. She knew every royal portrait, every branch of the family tree. This boy fit nowhere. William turned the frame carefully and noticed a yellowed paper attached to the back. The handwriting was old, formal, deliberate. He read aloud quietly, "Heir of two worlds, protected by silence." The words hung in the air, demanding answers. King Charles moved to another painting, then another. Each cloth revealed more faces. A young woman with kind eyes, an older man with a stern expression, a family standing together, all strangers, all dressed like royalty, all missing from history. The historian examined the sealed boxes with shaking hands. Inside were letters tied with ribbon, official documents stamped with royal seals, jewellery that still gleamed beneath the dust. These people mattered. They had status, power, importance, yet history had erased them completely. William stood before the boy's portrait, unable to look away. Those eyes troubled him. They held knowledge beyond years, as if the child knew his fate. He asked his father what it could mean. King Charles moved slowly through the room, touching nothing, observing everything. Possibilities raced through his mind. Hidden branches, private bloodlines, threats to succession. But these people hadn't been destroyed. They had been protected. Someone had gone to great lengths to preserve them. Someone had cared enough to build this chamber and hide their memory rather than erase it. The historian found a larger document, a hand-drawn family tree, names, dates, marriages, children. Lines branched and rejoined the main royal line again and again. Yet none of these names appeared in official records. It was as if they had been carefully edited out of history itself, removed, but not forgotten. King Charles finally stopped before the boy's portrait. His face grew pale. The resemblance struck him hard. The shape of the face, the eyes. He had seen those features before in his own family. His whisper barely stirred the dust-filled air. This shouldn't exist. The implications were too heavy to voice. If this boy shared royal blood, then royal history was incomplete, filled with gaps and silences where there should have been truth. William stood beside his father, questions multiplying faster than answers. Who hid these people? When? And why? Later, Prince William closed the library door softly. Silence returned, broken only by the rustle of old paper and the distant ticking of a clock. Princess Kate sat across from 2 trusted historians at a polished table. Between them lay the painting of the unknown boy. His eyes still held that mix of pride and sorrow. The historians had worked without rest since the discovery. Their findings brought no comfort. The portrait dated to the late 1800s, the Victorian era, a time of strict rules and even stricter secrets. And yet, the trail went cold. There were no birth records, no christening announcements, no mentions in letters or diaries. It was as if every trace of the child had been systematically erased from official history. Kate studied the boy's face, feeling a strange ache settle deep in her chest, unable to explain why his eyes made her feel as though something important had been lost and never truly gone. Someone had loved this child enough to commission a portrait, to dress him in royal finery, to capture his likeness so it could never fully disappear. That kind of love didn't happen by accident. It took intention, devotion, and courage. Yet that same love demanded something devastating, hiding him away where the world would never speak his name or know his story. William paced the room, his steps sharp and restless, thoughts colliding faster than he could control. The Victorian era had been layered with strict rules and quiet cruelty. Queen Victoria's children married into royal houses across Europe, building alliances stitched together by silence. Scandals were buried. Truths inconvenient to power were erased. But erasing a child, completely, felt extreme, even by those unforgiving standards. The second historian cleared her throat and gestured to a small wooden box resting on the table. Inside were bundles of letters, their paper yellowed with age, tied with faded ribbon that had once been blue. She explained she had spent hours reading them, barely stopping to rest. Together, the letters told a story, not of shame, but of love pressed into impossible corners. Kate untied the first bundle carefully, her fingers slow and deliberate. The handwriting flowed across the page in elegant script, graceful and controlled. The ink remained dark, stubborn against time. Each letter ended with only a single initial. As Kate read aloud softly, the library seemed to hold its breath. The writer spoke of a child with bright eyes and endless curiosity, a boy who loved stories, music, and asked questions about everything he saw. Every sentence carried affection, protection, pride, but between the warmth ran fear, tightly woven. The writer worried about discovery, about scandal, about consequences that could harm not just themselves but others they cared for deeply. One letter spoke of duty to the crown, another hinted at a love society would never accept, a third described the agony of choosing between personal happiness and obligation. William stopped pacing and leaned against the desk, listening intently. Each letter revealed something new, yet somehow explained less. Who was writing these words? Mother, father, guardian? And who was the child who inspired such fierce devotion? As Kate reached the middle of the bundle, the tone shifted. The writer spoke of preparations being made, of securing safety, of ensuring the child would be protected no matter the cost. They described building a hidden chamber, sealing away belongings and portraits so they could be preserved but never discovered. One phrase appeared again and again, for the sake of love and duty. The historians confirmed they found similar wording throughout the box. Someone had faced an impossible choice and chosen secrecy as the only way to protect everyone involved. That weekend, Prince George arrived eager to explore the castle's long corridors and hear stories of kings and queens long gone, but he sensed immediately something was different. His parents whispered in corners. Conversation stopped when he entered rooms. Papers vanished into drawers too quickly, hands moving with nervous speed. The castle felt heavier, less welcoming. George was young, but he noticed things. His father's distracted looks, his mother's practiced smiles that didn't reach her eyes. He had learned to read worry even when adults tried to hide it. On Sunday afternoon, George found them in a small sitting room, bent over old letters spread across the coffee table. Their voices were low. Unaware he stood nearby. He caught fragments, hidden, Victorian era, no records. His mother mentioned a painting. His father spoke about duty and impossible choices. George cleared his throat, both parents startled. He asked what they were doing, his voice curious, not accusing. William and Kate exchanged glances. How much should they say? He was young, but sharp. Avoiding the truth would only raise more questions. Kate invited him to sit beside her. Choosing simple words, she explained they had found something old beneath the castle. Letters and paintings from long ago, a mystery about people forgotten by history. George leaned forward, intrigued. He asked if it was like a treasure hunt. William smiled faintly despite the tension. In a way, yes. But this treasure didn't offer gold or answers. It raised questions about family, about the past, about secrets buried for more than a century. George studied the letters, though the handwriting was difficult for him to read. He asked why anyone would hide letters and paintings. Kate felt her throat tighten. She explained that sometimes people made painful choices to protect the ones they loved. Sometimes keeping secrets felt like the only way to keep everyone safe. George considered this seriously, his face thoughtful and still. Then he asked something that silenced them both. Did secrets stop being necessary once everyone from that time had passed away? The question lingered, simple yet piercing. William had no answer. That night, after George went to bed, William returned to the library alone. One letter remained unread, thicker than the others, sealed with wax cracked by time. He opened it carefully. The handwriting was familiar, but the tone felt final. The writer addressed someone in the future, not by name, but by title, the rightful heir who would one day uncover what had been hidden. William read slowly, heart pounding. The writer explained they had no choice. Society's rules, the Crown's demands, the crushing weight of duty made public acknowledgement impossible. But love would not allow destruction, so they preserved the truth, built the chamber, and left clues for someone wise enough to find them and brave enough to understand. Prince George could not stop thinking about the boy in the painting. Those eyes followed him into his dreams. Sad, knowing, waiting. Days passed, but the image remained. A boy dressed in royal clothes, hidden like something shameful. Someone who should have mattered, but didn't, at least not in any history book George had ever read. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, George wandered into the castle library with his mother. While Kate searched for books, George drifted toward older shelves where dust danced in grey light. His fingers stopped on a thin green volume. The title was almost gone, but he could read Windsor's Hidden Spaces. He opened it carefully. The pages were brittle. The book described secret passages, forgotten rooms, architectural mysteries. Diagrams showed walls hiding doors, staircases leading nowhere. Then something slipped free and fluttered onto the table. George's breath caught instantly. He recognized the face at once. The same boy from the portrait stared back in pencil, less detailed but unmistakable. The sadness in the eyes was the same. George called his mother. Kate rushed over and froze. She turned the sketch over with trembling hands. On the back were 3 words in elegant script. Edward, the unnamed. The phrase felt cruel, acknowledging existence while denying identity. Kate felt cold spread through her chest. Someone wanted this boy remembered, but only quietly, in hidden sketches and sealed chambers. She told George they needed to show this to his father immediately, but George didn't move. He stared at the sketch, his face holding something Kate had never seen before. Not curiosity, but grief. He spoke softly, barely audible. "He looks lonely, Mummy." The words hit Kate harder than any historical revelation. George had seen past mystery and intrigue straight to the truth. A child alone, forgotten by everyone except whoever had loved him enough to hide these traces of his life. She pulled her son close and told him, yes, Edward probably had been lonely. Whatever happened must have been terribly difficult for everyone involved. When George asked if they could help Edward somehow, even after all this time, Kate felt tears prick her eyes, realizing compassion had crossed centuries and refused to disappear. She explained that uncovering the truth might be the only real way of helping now, by digging up the missing pieces and snapping them back together where they belonged. In doing so, they were finally giving Edward something he never had while he was alive: recognition, acknowledgement, proof that his life mattered. The boy nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the sketch, studying it like he was trying to see past the pencil lines and understand the person who had once existed behind them. That night the storm came hard and fast. William and Kate lay awake as the wind howled and rain lashed the windows, neither of them able to sleep for even a moment. The discovery of Edward's name had stirred more questions than it answered. Who had he really been? Why was he hidden away from the world? And why did finding him feel less like solving an old mystery and more like waking something that had been buried and waiting? A violent crack of thunder slammed into the castle, shaking the walls so hard the framed portraits rattled in protest. Then came the sound, sharp, sudden, unmistakable, glass shattering down the hall. William threw on his robe and rushed toward the noise. Kate right behind him, her heart already racing. They both knew what they were about to see before they even reached the door. The room where the painting had been stored. William shoved the door open just as lightning exploded across the sky, flooding the room in stark white light. The portrait stared back at them, but something was wrong now. A deep crack ran straight down the glass, slicing the image cleanly in two from top to bottom. Edward's face was split perfectly, divided down the centre like a deliberate mark. No other glass had shattered anywhere in the room. No other artwork showed a single scratch. Only this painting had been damaged, and it happened at the exact moment the thunder shook the castle to its core. At the time, they believed the storm had destroyed the painting, never realizing it was about to expose something far bigger. "Stay with us," The room behind the books was about to tell its own story. The electricians arrived the next day to repair damage caused by the storm. Lightning had struck near the old library, knocking out power across an entire wing of the castle. They worked by flashlight and voltage meters, tracing wires through thick stone walls that had stood untouched for centuries. One electrician pressed his palm against the library wall, checking for heat or damaged circuits. The panel shifted under his hand, looser than it should have been. He pushed again, harder this time, and something moved. With a low grinding sound, a section of the wall slid inward. Everyone froze. The electrician aimed his flashlight through the opening, revealing nothing but heavy darkness beyond. A rush of stale, ancient air spilled out, thick and cold, like the room itself was breathing for the first time in decades. Within the hour, William stood before the opening alongside palace officials and historians. Another hidden space. Another secret the castle had locked away, waiting until pure chance forced it into the open. They widened the gap and stepped inside. The room was barely larger than a closet, yet every inch of it was filled with meaning. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with leather-bound diaries and journals. A small desk sat in the corner, its surface still stained with dried ink inside a crystal well. Half-burned candle stubs remained in their holders, abandoned mid-use. And in the centre of the room sat a wooden chest. The chest's lid was sealed with hardened wax, stamped with a royal crest. William moved carefully through the space, trying to imagine who had used this hidden study, who had written these words by candlelight, knowing they could never be seen. A historian gently opened the diaries, her hand steady but reverent. The dates stretched across several years in the late 1800s. The handwriting was consistent throughout, and each entry was signed with the same initial, E. It was clear now that one person had written all of this, documenting a life that could never be acknowledged publicly. William knelt beside the chest, the seal looking official and deeply important. He broke it carefully and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of neatly organised papers, architectural drawings, supply lists, schedules, lesson plans, all carefully bundled. At the top of every page was the same heading, Secret Education Chamber. William spread the documents across the desk, piecing together their meaning. Someone had designed a full classroom hidden within the castle, a place where a child could learn reading, mathematics, history, and languages, completely unseen by the outside world. The notes detailed tutors sworn to silence, books purchased through discreet intermediaries, and special arrangements for every stage of a child's growth. Whoever planned this knew the boy would grow, learn and mature while remaining invisible. One document explained why in painfully clear language, and as the historian read it aloud, her voice trembled on certain words. The child had been born from a forbidden romance, two people deeply in love, yet unable to acknowledge it publicly, one of royal blood, the other deemed unsuitable by the brutal standards of Victorian society. Their son carried that impossibility in his very existence, a living proof of love that broke unwritten rules. He was a child who should not have existed under the rigid boundaries governing royal life. So they hid him, not out of shame, but protection. Hiding became the only way to keep him safe, to protect both parents, and to avoid a scandal that could have destroyed multiple lives. Edward, unnamed and unseen, had been hidden beneath the castle so he could remain close to those who loved him most. That evening, King Charles met privately with William in his study. The weight of what they had uncovered pressed heavily between them. The king spoke quietly about the burden of the crown and the cost of duty. Royal life, he explained, had always demanded sacrifice. Sometimes that meant giving up personal desires for the monarchy. Sometimes it meant denying love itself. William listened closely, hearing the pain beneath his father's words. Charles wasn't just speaking about the past. He was speaking about every generation forced to make impossible choices. He admitted times had changed, that modern life allowed more freedom than the Victorian era ever did. But the core conflict remained: personal happiness versus public duty, love versus obligation. Edward had been trapped in that clash and paid the ultimate price for it. Later that night, William sat alone with the final diary, wrapped carefully in cloth at the bottom of the chest, clearly marked as something special. He opened it slowly. The entries were short, written by someone capturing moments they could never speak aloud. There were descriptions of a bright child learning to read, a boy who loved stories of knights and distant lands, a child who asked difficult questions, why he couldn't go outside, why he couldn't meet other children, why his life had to remain secret. It was the desperate love of someone trying to soften an impossible situation, a child who understood more than anyone wanted him to. George had been quiet for 3 days after learning the truth. His parents noticed immediately. He was thinking deeply, turning it over like one of his puzzles that refused to solve itself. At breakfast on Thursday, he finally spoke. He asked if he could see the hidden chamber where Edward's belongings were kept. William and Kate exchanged careful glances across the table. They had tried to shield George from the heaviest parts of the story, unsure how much a child should carry. But looking at his serious expression, they knew he already carried it. Keeping him away wouldn't make it lighter. Kate told him they would go that afternoon. The descent into the tunnels felt different this time. George held his mother's hand tightly, his free hand brushing against the cold stone walls. The air grew colder with every step, and their footsteps echoed deep into the darkness beyond the lantern light. When they reached the chamber, George stopped at the doorway. The painting stood on an easel, the crack in its glass catching the light like a scar. He approached slowly, like someone meeting a face he'd only seen in dreams. Up close, Edward looked even more real. The artist had captured every detail, the folds in the fine fabric, each strand of hair, the faint shine in eyes filled with both intelligence and sadness. George stared in silence while the adults watched him. King Charles stood near the back, quietly observing his grandson's first encounter with the room. Minutes passed without a word. George leaned closer, his face serious with concentration. Then he pointed to something small on the painted boy's collar and asked what it meant. Everyone gathered closer. Despite all their inspections, no one had noticed the tiny emblem stitched onto Edward's jacket. It was barely larger than a button, easy to miss among the details, but George had seen it and recognized it. He pulled a small toy crown from his pocket, one he carried everywhere. Etched into its side was the exact same symbol, a circle with 2 overlapping hearts surrounded by tiny crown-like shapes or petals. The historians rushed forward, magnifying glasses in hand, comparing the symbols side by side. They were identical, but what did it mean? One historian hurried into another room where items were being catalogued and returned holding an old book, its pages marked with strips of faded fabric. Her hands shook as she opened it to a specific page. She explained that she had seen the symbol before while researching the secret letters. It appeared repeatedly in several Victorian-era documents, always connected to a specific branch of the royal family, one that had been deliberately removed from official genealogies. The emblem surfaced in marginal notes, sealed correspondence, and drafts that never made it into the final records, as if someone had tried to erase it without quite being able to destroy it completely. The symbol represented something the rigid Victorian establishment had considered dangerous: unity between heart and duty. It stood for the belief that love and responsibility did not have to cancel each other out. That service to the crown could coexist with personal feeling rather than demand its destruction. That idea threatened those who believed duty required total sacrifice, unquestioning obedience, and emotional silence. Because of that belief, the symbol was purged from official use. The family branch associated with it was quietly edited out of records, their names removed, their achievements reassigned, their existence reduced to gaps and inconsistencies in the archives. Their philosophy was buried along with them, hidden behind careful omissions and rewritten narratives. Edward had worn that symbol on his collar as a silent declaration of what he represented. He was the child of a love that duty said should never exist, living proof that heart and crown could stand together if only society had allowed it. His very existence challenged the idea that sacrifice must always mean loss. George absorbed all of this in silence, his expression far too old for his years. He turned back to the painting, staring at Edward's face with an intensity that made the adults uneasy. Something in the way he looked at the boy suggested recognition rather than curiosity. Then, without warning, his eyes filled with tears. Kate moved toward him instinctively, but he spoke before she could reach him. His voice was small, unsteady, each word heavy with emotion he didn't yet have the language to explain. He said quietly that Edward had just wanted to belong. That was all, just to be part of the family he could see but never truly join. The simplicity of it struck everyone in the chamber like a physical blow. All the complicated history, the social rules, the royal protocols, the impossible choices, all of it collapsed into a single truth. A child who wanted to belong and was denied that most basic human need. George's tears fell freely now. He wiped at them with his sleeve, still staring at the painting. He spoke about how Edward must have heard his family walking above him through the castle halls, how he must have listened to voices, laughter, footsteps, life happening just out of reach. He imagined Edward watching from hidden windows or narrow gaps, seeing the world he was never allowed to enter, so close to love, yet separated by walls he did not build and rules he did not make. He said it must have been terribly lonely. Kate knelt beside her son and pulled him close, feeling her own eyes burn. William turned away, his jaw tight, fighting emotion he could no longer fully hide. The historians busied themselves with papers and notes, but several quietly wiped their faces. King Charles stood very still near the back of the chamber. His grandson's words had reached somewhere deep inside him, into the place where his own sacrifices lived, the private costs of duty, the things he had given up for the crown. His shoulders shook slightly as he turned away, but the tears had already been seen. After a few minutes, Kate suggested they should leave. It had been enough for one day. George needed fresh air and sunlight, not underground shadows and century-old grief. They gathered their belongings and moved toward the door. George walked slowly, reluctant to leave Edward alone again in the darkness. At the threshold, he turned back for one last look at the painting. He drew in a sharp breath. For just a moment, so brief it could almost be dismissed, the light shifted across the cracked glass. George was certain he saw something change. Not the face exactly, but the expression, as if the boy in the portrait had softened, had noticed him. George whispered something too quiet for the others to hear. A promise, one he fully intended to keep, maybe not immediately, but someday. 2 princes, 1 heart. The meeting room fell silent as King Charles entered later that afternoon. Senior historians lined one side of the long table, their faces grave beneath the weight of what they had uncovered. Royal advisers occupied the other side, clutching folders thick with documentation. Prince William and Princess Kate sat near the end of the table. Prince George remained with his grandmother in another room, unaware of the decision now forming. Charles took his seat at the head of the table and said nothing for a long moment. He simply studied the faces around him. These were the guardians of royal history, the keepers of narrative, the ones tasked with preserving not just facts, but appearances. Today, he would ask them to do something different. He began by acknowledging what they all already knew. The discovery beneath the castle had revealed a truth previous generations had chosen to bury. A child born of love that society deemed inappropriate. A boy denied his name, his place, his history, not because he was unworthy, but because he was inconvenient. The historians shifted uneasily. Charles continued, explaining that the crown had evolved. Modern values recognized that the rigid cruelty of Victorian social standards had caused immeasurable harm. Hiding Edward may have protected sensibilities, but it also sent a message that some lives mattered less, that some love was shameful simply because it crossed artificial boundaries. Then he spoke plainly, his decision unmistakable and final. Edward, the unnamed, would be restored to the royal archives. His story would be acknowledged officially as part of Windsor history, not hidden in footnotes, not whispered in corridors, but documented fully and truthfully with the dignity he had been denied in life. The room remained silent. Then an elderly historian spoke carefully, asking about public reaction, about how people might respond to learning the royal family had hidden a child for over a century. Charles met her gaze without hesitation. He said honesty, even difficult honesty, strengthened the monarchy rather than weakened it. Admitting past mistakes showed growth. Acknowledging Edward honoured not just one forgotten boy, but all those whose stories had been erased for similar reasons. William added his support. Speaking of George's reaction, his son had seen past protocol and politics to the simple human tragedy at the centre, a child who just wanted to belong. If a young boy could understand that truth with such sharp clarity, then surely the institution could as well. The historians around the table began nodding, slowly at first, then with conviction. One by one they spoke up, voices steady, admitting this decision was right, long overdue, uncomfortable, but right, all the same. The transformation of the secret chamber took 3 full months. Architects moved with extreme care, preserving the room's original character while making it safe and accessible. Every stone, every beam, every shadow was respected. This was not renovation, it was restoration. The hidden study behind the library was opened and connected as part of the space. Together, the rooms told the full scope of Edward's hidden life. His toys were carefully placed, his books laid out, the letters signed with E displayed beside the architectural plans for his secret education. Proof, not just that he existed, but that he was loved. But the chamber did not stop with Edward. Historians dug deeper and uncovered other forgotten royal children across centuries. Stillborn babies never officially recorded. Children who passed away young and were quietly erased from family trees. Others born under circumstances society refused to accept. The chamber became a remembrance room for all of them, a space that acknowledged royal history, like all history, was filled with gaps where real lives had once existed, lives that mattered but were never honoured properly. Silence replaced with truth. Edward's portrait was placed at the centre. The cracked glass was left untouched. That fracture had become part of his story, a visible reminder that secrets damage even when meant to protect. The break stayed, honest and undeniable. On the day the chamber officially opened to the family, George stood before the portrait for a long time. His parents watched quietly, remembering the tears he had shed months earlier, how deeply he had felt Edward's loneliness. The room felt different now. Warm lighting replaced the cold shadows. Fresh flowers rested in simple vases. Plaques told the story clearly, honestly, without euphemisms or excuses. This space honoured. It no longer hid. George finally turned to his parents, his face serious but calm. He spoke softly, his words simple but powerful. He said that now Edward would never be alone again. People would know him. His story would live. Kate felt tears rise again. But these were different. These were tears of release. George reminded her of something adults often forget. Truth heals more than it hurts. Acknowledgement brings peace, even to wounds left open for centuries. Love expressed late still counts as love. Charles stepped closer and placed a hand on George's shoulder. He told his grandson that he had taught them all something important. Seeing Edward as a human first, not a complication, was the right instinct. The instinct they should have followed from the beginning. Months passed. Summer faded into autumn, and Windsor settled into a new rhythm. The chamber became a quiet refuge, a place family members visited when duty felt heavy. When perspective was needed, the castle itself felt lighter, as if the ancient stones had finally exhaled. Staff noticed it. Family felt it. Even visitors sensed something peaceful in the air, though they couldn't explain why. Secrets lifted had changed the atmosphere. One October afternoon, golden light spilled through tall library windows. William found George reading in the same library where everything had begun. He sat beside his son and waited until George looked up. William spoke about that day in the chamber, about the tears George cried. He said those tears came from understanding something most adults ignore. That compassion, real compassion, was wisdom. He told George that empathy was what made a good person, and someday, perhaps, a good king. Power meant nothing without compassion. Duty without heart became cruelty. The crown's true strength came not from authority, but from recognizing humanity, even in those the world tried to forget. George listened carefully, processing every word. Then he asked if they could visit Edward before dinner. They descended together into the chamber as evening settled. Sunlight slipped through high windows, bathing the room in warm, amber light. George carried a single white rose from the castle garden. He placed it gently beneath Edward's portrait. his movements slow and respectful. The light caught the cracked glass just right. The fracture glowed softly. For one brief moment, Edward's expression seemed to change. The sadness in his eyes softened. The corners of his mouth lifted just slightly. A smile, or the memory of one, travelling across time. George saw it. He smiled back quietly. William saw it too. He stood behind his son, one hand resting on George's shoulder. Two princes, separated by a century, connected by compassion, recognition, and understanding. If this story moved you, tap like, subscribe for more, share this with someone who loves royal history, and comment below. Do you think the truth should always come out no matter how long it's been hidden?